Welcome to Independent Sources and the premiere of our second season. I'm Garry Pierre-Pierre.
And I'm Vianora Vinca. This season will continue to bring you news and perspectives from the ethnic, immigrant, and community media. We'll follow the pressing political issues of the day, like healthcare and immigration reform, and explore the rich cultural diversity of communities in New York and beyond.
On this edition of Independent Sources, we look at the growing demand for CNN to drop the Dobbs show. Some Latino and civil rights groups are saying enough of the controversial cable talk show host.
We profile a correspondent for a small website that's making a big impact reporting news about Iran.
And we'll hear about some young Jews who are bringing home the bacon.
All that and news of the week when we come back.
Ethnic media is important because it's a bridge between ethnic communities and the larger American community.
Do you know about Dobbs at all? Do you know who Dobbs is?
Yes, yes.
What do you think about him?
I mean, I don't watch him regularly, but I do watch him from time to time. And in general, whatever he's saying, because he's a lot on these immigration issues, and I tend to agree with him.
I disagree with him on most issues because he sounds very pessimistic every time he addresses anything that's on the agenda that Obama's putting forward.
I think he's a plain racist, and everybody has a platform to speak. You know, if you watch Fox News and all that, they're racist. You know, they talk about all the minorities, and they talk about against everybody, and nobody are responsible for anything.
Tonight, CNN premieres its series Latino in America, a portrait of Latino culture and communities in the U.S. But some Latinos are not happy with the way they're portrayed by one of the network's controversial commentators, Dobbs. They accuse him of being anti-immigrant and anti-Latino and want CNN to cancel his show.
The Dobbs movement has gained momentum through internet initiatives like Basta Dobbs or Enough Dobbs. And in cities across the country, the campaign is escalating.
When reporting on illegal immigration, facts are often secondary to his advocacy.
I recently talked with representatives of two groups that support the move to get rid of Dobbs. Angelo Falcón is on the board of the National Hispanic Media Coalition. Marcia Kuntz, who joined us via Skype, is editor-in-chief of Media Matters for America, a Washington, D.C.-based group that monitors the press. Angela, let's start with you. Dobbs has been at this for quite some time. What has changed? Why are groups coalescing against him now?
Well, for many, many years in the Latino community, people have been outraged by the kinds of reporting he does that's so anti-Latino, anti-immigrant, and so factually off. I mean, this guy just makes stuff up. What's happening this year is that I think a lot of groups come together. The birthing, he's also been playing around with this birthing business with the president. Is the president really, was he born in the United States kind of thing? And that's continued to increase the number of people that are really, really dissatisfied by the way he's handling himself. And the idea is not, it's not to get rid of him in terms of his free speech. It's just CNN is supposed to be the most trusted voice in the news today. And basically, he shouldn't be in a place like CNN with the kind of brand of quote-unquote journalism that he basically spews.
Marcia, one of the Dobbs self-defense is that he's a journalist and he's just exercising his free speech, his rights of the First Amendment. What do you say to that?
Well, this has nothing to do with the First Amendment. This is about groups trying to bring attention to Lou Dobbs and CNN's Dobbs problem, and trying to educate both advertisers and the public about what it is that they are supporting by contributing money to the Dobbs program to advertise on that program.
Do you expect
That has nothing to do with the First Amendment. This is not about the government telling him what he can and cannot say. This is about consumers saying, wait a second, what's our money going to?
Do you think CNN is likely to get rid of him or have him temper down some of his rhetorics?
Well, Dobbs presents a daily embarrassment to CNN. CNN purports to be, as Angelo said, purports to be the most trusted name in news. And on a daily basis, Lou Dobbs tarnishes that record and that image. And I don't know how CNN is going to handle it, but they really need to address their Dobbs problem.
Angelo, has CNN put out any statement to the organization, to the various groups? What is their take on this situation?
Well, for the most part, you know, he's a moneymaker for them, although his ratings appears to have been going down lately. So I think they do everything to kind of defend them and to kind of deflect, you know, these criticisms. Like at one point they were saying, oh, well, no, we'll build a program as commentary. It's not really a news program. But the fact is that they're not taking this on. I don't think they're beginning to take it seriously, because I think they're beginning to feel some of the pressure. But really, as Marcia mentioned, look, this really goes to the issue of CNN's reputation, journalistic integrity. And right now they've been flirting with that for profits, and that's what's wrong with journalism today. And CNN, I think it is an embarrassment. This man, I mean, you look at some of the reporters he has assigned to him, and they're like squirming because after they do a report, he tries to make them, you know, give a biased kind of you know, interpretation. And you can see them squirming on the TV like, that's not, you know, what I'm supposed to do as a journalist. So this is a real serious problem. And for CNN, for example, they're unveiling a series called Latino in America. So they're trying to say that they're supportive of the Latino community. Meanwhile, they have this guy who's, you know, people are increasingly seeing that what he does has consequences. People getting killed, people getting harassed, Latinos, you know, and so that this is not just some sort of like abstract kind of issue, or we disagree with him ideologically. This has serious consequences for our community, and we want something to be done.
Well, speaking of that, Marcia, what have you done? What are some of the concrete steps you've taken to put some pressure on CNN to move in a positive way, as you see it?
Well, we're a media monitoring organization, and we've been monitoring CNN, all the media, for 5.5 years now since we've been in existence. And Dobbs is a daily source of conservative misinformation. And we highlight his falsehoods and his smears and misinformation. And we also highlight, as Angela pointed out, the disparity between his supposed so-called reporting and what the rest of CNN does. And that disparity seems to be getting greater as Dobbs aligns himself with the birther movement and with some of the crazier stuff. We've done some studies showing that his obsession with immigration and also, interestingly, with gun control, claiming that Obama wants to take away your guns, his obsession has resulted in like 12 to 13 times as much coverage per hour of these issues as appears on CNN's Situation Room, which is remarkable. It shows what the difference is between his coverage and the rest of CNN's.
You know, CNN will start Latinos in America. What do you think about that show in light of some of the daily dosage of Dobbs?
Well, I think it's hypocritical. I mean, on the one hand, you're doing that, and on the other hand, you're supporting something that's harmful to our community. So I think this gives our community and others that are interested in making sure that Dobbs is no longer on CNN to kind of use that as an example to show the contradictions and to show that you can't have it both ways, CNN. And so I think there's going to be a growing movement here, and I think that may be a flashpoint here in terms of Latinos confronting CNN and raising those contradictions. So it's interesting because it's all part of Hispanic Heritage Month, and hopefully it gives us an opportunity to kind of educate the public about what's really going on, and to let the people, the executives at CNN know that them and Time Warner, if they want to work with the Latino community, have to do something about this.
Marcia, you know, Dobbs is on CNN every night, but there are people like Rush Limbaugh, Beck, Michael Savage, and many others who have similar views. I mean, are you guys going to stop at Dobbs, or are you going to go after them as well?
Well, we've been monitoring Glenn Beck and Rush Limbaugh for years as well and highlighting their misinformation. The interesting thing about Dobbs, though, is that he's given this prestigious platform of CNN. And in a sense, he's CNN's Glenn Beck. And well, Glenn Beck used to be on Headline News and moved over to Fox. But Dobbs remains CNN's Glenn Beck, and he is, as I say, constantly tarnishes the image of CNN. So there's a real disparity there between what CNN purports to be and their continued employment of this person and his nightly show.
Angela, I read somewhere that, you know, you got one of the tactics that the group wanted to do is to have Lou Dobbs show translated into Spanish. Why?
To have them translated? Well,
yeah, you have the show translated to Spanish.
CNN has CNN in Espanol, but Lou Dobbs is not translated to Spanish. And I haven't heard that one, but I heard that the criticism that in the Latino community, there are many people who are Spanish-speaking that don't watch, get to see his show. It could be that some people think it would be important for the rest of the Latino community to know what this guy's saying. But as far as I know, I haven't heard that tactic. Marcia, is that something that you're familiar with?
Well, it's our view that that the less attention he receives, the better. And it's, for our informal slogan is "We watch so you don't have to," and we would be happy to continue to monitor him and let people know the outrages that he is engaging in. At the same time, I think it would be interesting for Spanish-speaking people to know just how terrible his show is. But they can do that by reading Media Matters.
Well, that's on that note, Angela. One of the turns of this campaign has been that Lou Dobbs has attacked Roberto Lovato personally. Do you think that's good that he's trying to concentrate this debate between one person and himself? Or
I think it's terrific. When I heard he did that, I said, good, we're hitting a nerve. He's basically getting into personal attacks. And I think that just makes his position clearer to people because it's so petty and the kinds of attacks. If you criticize him, if you disagree with him, all of a sudden you're an ultra-left something or other. He always comes up with the same term for everybody. He's insulted national Latino organizations like the National Council of La Raza, United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and it goes on and on and on. So this guy, as opposed to dealing with the issues, basically gets into these kinds of personal attacks. To me, it sounds like desperation. It sounds like all these groups are hitting a nerve. And so it was welcome news, and that's what Roberto Lovato is about. He's leading the thing, so, good. He could take the attacks, and it's not just him. It's a wide coalition of people. So if Lou Dobbs thinks that it's just one person and he tries to personalize it, well, he's mistaken. That means he doesn't even know what's really going on.
We'll have to leave it at that. Angelo Falcón, thanks for being here. Marcia Kuntz, thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much.
CNN has declined to talk about the campaign against Dobbs. Now, here's Aisha Al-Muslim with some other stories in the news.
Thanks, Gary. Here's a look at some headlines in the ethnic media. El Diario La Prensa and the New York Amsterdam News both announced that they are endorsing Comptroller William Thompson for mayor. In a front-page editorial, El Diario compares Mayor Michael Bloomberg to Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez for changing the term limits law to seek a third term. The Amsterdam News also points out the term limits issue. The Forward reports that Americans from Arab backgrounds are having trouble entering Israel since the Jewish nation started enforcing a new entry policy this past spring. Advocacy groups for Arab Americans demand that the Obama administration challenge Israel over what they call discrimination against American citizens of Arab descent. From New American Media, the effects of the recession have been harder on Black and Hispanic retirees and those heading for retirement. The AARP survey found that in the past year, Black and Hispanic elders have struggled to pay their medical costs, food, and utilities more than their white counterparts. And finally, small Korean businesses in New York City suffering from the economic downturn are targeting Chinese customers. The Korea Daily News reports that Chinese customers are expected to increase business because they are seen as big spenders. Small businesses like restaurants and real estate brokers are hiring bilingual Korean and Chinese speakers and advertising more in New York's Chinese media. Those are just a few headlines in the ethnic media. Back to you, Vianora.
When Tehran Bureau started less than a year ago, the idea was to create an online site where contributors of Iranian descent could file stories on everything from art to politics. But the Boston-based website quickly found its niche reporting on the post-election protests that erupted in Iran and other places in June. Independent Sources producer Michelle García found that for the website's New York correspondent, reporting politics became personal.
There were huge numbers of riot police who were deployed.
It was one of the biggest news stories, June 12th, when Iranians turned out for the highly contested presidential elections. Just hours after the polls closed, the incumbent, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, was declared the winner. The streets of Tehran filled with protesters charging the election had been rigged.
If the elections were true, then why all over the world, then why in
In New York City, Iranian Americans heard the outcry from Tehran and hit the streets. In the crowd, taking photos and scribbling notes, was Laila Darabi, correspondent for the online news site Tehran Bureau.
The first thing I said was, this is an event that I attended that I can't report on from a New York Times standard of objectivity. I'm too close to this story. This is the Iranian American community of New York City reacting to something very emotional that's happening in Iran.
From this Brooklyn park, Darabi received updates from her family in Tehran, then passed on the bits of information to her editor. A network of correspondents, journalists within Tehran, delivered on-the-ground coverage.
Our camera and videotape confiscated by police, we filmed the protests on our cell phones.
In Iran, the government responded to the demonstrations by clamping down on the international media, expelling foreign correspondents. Hundreds of protesters and journalists were arrested, with accusations of rape and torture still under investigation. And through it, a frenzy of online citizen journalism emerged.
I was calling Tehran a lot. I know other people were calling Tehran. I'd say a lot of information has passed over Facebook and email and Twitter.
Mainstream media journalists came to call Tehran Bureau indispensable. Journalist and filmmaker Kouross Esmaeli is a sought-after analyst on Iranian affairs. He says Tehran Bureau's advantage also proved a journalistic challenge.
Definitely on CNN, it happened on Tehran Bureau, where where there's a mass amount of information, of visual information coming to you, and you have to sift through them. And a lot of times, sometimes you don't know what to trust, what not to trust, because immediately after this process of like twittering and blogging and uploading to YouTube became an important activity. There were things put up that were from different contexts, different countries, different time periods, and all of us relied on them or showed them believing that they're from that specific moment when they weren't.
The election results in Iran were later certified and upheld. For Darabi, the Iranian elections became an intensely personal and pivotal moment in her life here in the U.S., and the media was her outlet.
I felt much more invested. I felt much more Iranian, and I feel like even in my day-to-day life, in my day job, I'm much more representative of, if not Iran, Iranian Americans.
I asked Darabi if her closeness to the story affected her objectivity.
But what you're coming to me for in particular is that insider's view of what is it like to be Iranian American and go to a protest in New York about something that's happening in Iran when your father and your family is there, and what does that government's politics have to do with your life here?
With the elections and its aftermath no longer in crisis, Darabi has returned to her beat covering New York's Iranian arts and culture scene, but this time with a new purpose.
The artists from inside are really reaching out, whereas artists from outside are kind of reaching back a little bit more.
And like the artists whose work is on display, Darabi finds herself reaching inside Iran as the voice of Iranians are heard across the world.
It's kept me much more in touch with my family in Iran. I call so much more often. It's I think made us all think much more big picture about what it means that they're living there and I'm living here.
For Independent Sources, I'm Michelle Garcia.
Tehran Bureau recently formed a partnership with Frontline, the acclaimed investigative journalism series on PBS. I talked with new media columnist and Professor Jeff Jarvis about these niche mainstream collaborations. Is this a trend? Will we see more of these niche mainstream partnerships?
Collaboration is the future of journalism. The idea that one big organization can do it all around the world is just simply over. And it's not just because they're losing money, but it's also because on the internet you can collaborate and cooperate with people anywhere. So there's a lot of examples of this going on. Global Post has put correspondents in 70+ cities around the world, and it's syndicating its content to newspapers, yes, but it also is finding a way to distribute it online. Politico, a new newspaper in Washington, is also distributing its content to other newspapers in the U.S. But I think it gets even bigger than that. I think the whole notion of collaboration is that you cooperate not only with big media organizations and small ones, but also with the witnesses. If you look at what happened in Tehran during the election, you saw the witnesses using Twitter to get across what was happening there, and that was the only source of news we had. And I think that's the real future of news.
So we're talking mostly about websites forming partnerships with the big mainstream, or not necessarily?
Right, the web is the future no matter what. So a lot of these organizations are still syndicating their content into print products, yes. But the point of this is that the web changes the structure of media. The internet demands specialization. The idea that you have to be and can be all things to all people anymore is over. And so you do what you do best and link to the rest. And rather than having correspondents around the world, there already are people around the world who are witnessing this, and you can use them thanks to the web.
Obviously, each organization has something to gain from a partnership such as this. The smaller organization gains access to a wider audience, and the established organization gets access to places and perspectives it may not have, right?
Right. I think that that's really the kind of collaborative and cooperative world we're going to have in the new ecosystem of news. You know, especially in the U.S., in most cities outside of New York, we ended up with one or maybe two newspapers, and they owned the market. Well, that's over now, and they really can't, those papers can't do the whole world, and they shouldn't do the whole world. But they do have an audience still. They do have that local audience. So they should cover what they do best, and then they can link to others. And that's really the way that readers can find more good journalism. It's through aggregation and curation of the journalism that I think we have the new packaging of news.
But there are risks also, right, for the big organization forming a partnership with a small organization and vice versa.
Well, I guess the biggest risk for the big organization is their credibility. You know, do they know who they're partnering with, who they're collaborating with? One of the great skills of journalism going forward is to say what you don't know, is to give caveats. And this has been true on 24-hour cable news. You know, the story is going on right now. Here's what we don't know. Is that boy in the balloon or not? We don't know this. And I think the public has gotten very good at that. So it's a new skill for big organizations to say, well, we're working with somebody here, and this is what we know about them. For the small organization, yeah, I guess there's some risks there that they can be kind of subsumed, and what they're giving away is their Google juice. They're giving away their spot on the web if they syndicate their content to lots of places. But they're also gaining distribution in all those places, and I think it's worth doing.
What about their editorial independence?
Well, a small organization, I think, can decide what it wants to do and what it doesn't want to do, and it can publish what it wants to publish. And if it's challenged in any way by the big organization, it still has a home online. So with or without the big organization, the small organization can still have its own voice and credibility in its home.
And you're confident that the small organization wouldn't give in or be influenced by the bigger organization over time?
Well, it's the market pressure on journalism no matter what. And that is that what's popular and what sells is an influence on what we choose to do. Whether that comes directly from the audience in the form of traffic, or whether that comes from the big organizations and what they choose to buy, yeah, that's an influence on you. And at the end of the day, your asset is your credibility. So if you choose to do nothing but sensationalistic stories, that's what you become. And maybe you'll sell for a while, but in the long run, maybe you'll fall down. That's your decision to make on the web.
And isn't the established organization simply taking a risk on a young news operation?
I think the established news organizations are too old and they need more young voices. And they need more voices from around the world who know things differently. And the idea that a reporter in a newsroom can cover absolutely everything better than someone who lives and understands the market is outmoded. It was based on the old structure of media and the fact that one newspaper owned a town and the person who owned the printing press owned that town. That's just not the case anymore. Now we have to be more open to more voices. And that's confusing to people who are used to hearing one voice. But I think this is the cacophony of democracy and the cacophony of diversity around the world. And when we hear many voices, that's better for journalism and better for us to judge. It's not as clean and neat, but life isn't clean and neat, and neither is the internet.
Jeff Jarvis, thank you for being on the program.
Thank you.
We end our show with a story about pigging out. Jewish dietary laws forbid eating pork, but some young Jews are blatantly breaking the rules. Producer Abi Ishola found out why they see nothing wrong with being hog wild.
Before right away. A hamburger, a turkey on Thanksgiving. How do you know when it's done?
Avram Wiseman's lectures at the Center of Kosher Culinary Arts in Brooklyn are based on kashrut, or Jewish dietary laws.
This is a finished stock.
Those laws permit Jews to eat beef, lamb, veal, and meats from several other four-legged animals slaughtered according to kosher standards. But one of America's most beloved foods is completely X'd off the kosher list.
Jews are not allowed to eat pork because it is specifically
banned in the Torah. The 5 books of Moses, the Old Testament, specifically states which animals are allowed to be eaten and not allowed to be eaten.
Yet that hasn't stopped some from indulging in the forbidden fruit. Leah Koenig, food columnist for the Jewish Daily Forward, says this isn't a new phenomenon.
There's sort of a joke that like a Jew will go into a Chinese restaurant. You know, they may keep kosher in their home, but when they go into a Chinese restaurant, as long as the lighting's dark enough and the food's chopped up small enough, they'll eat whatever gets put in front of them.
But Jews who openly eat pork are the focus of her recent article titled "The Swine of the Times," which triggered a heated debate among readers. Koenig says it's become a trend for some to flaunt their pork fetish as a reverse way of proclaiming their Jewish identity. And while pork isn't the only forbidden food for Jews, it's often viewed as the ultimate taboo.
There's been times in history, starting way back with like the Hanukkah story, like the Maccabees, where like Jews were told to eat pork as sort of a way of kind of testing their religion or taunting them for not being part of the larger society. So it sort of has become it's become a very loaded food in terms of the Jewish psyche, I would say.
A food that is a staple in the diets of many self-proclaimed Reform Jews, like Marc Schapiro.
So why do you like pork so much?
Taste. It's, I don't know, like it was funny, like growing up in Texas, and you know, my mom, yeah, she would cook bacon, but she also bought Hebrew National hot dogs. And I always realized that they were okay, but then you go to a baseball game and you had the real like kind of pork hot dogs, and those were so much better.
The full-time music executive also fed off the recent popularity of the bacon explosion, a recipe for a gigantic wrap of bacon and sausage. The portly dish inspired him to launch BaconJew.com, a blog site loaded with comedic sarcasm about the Jewish no-swine law. He even trademarked the word kosher for his Bacon Jew clothing line. Both ventures have managed to ruffle a few feathers in the Jewish community.
I don't think, people understand just sarcasm and having fun with, serious things, like whether it's religion, anything in life, if you got to have fun with it.
Some understand Shapiro's stance, but don't agree.
It's interesting because I feel like that's something I could have done like 8 years ago or something. I could have been part of that website. And now it's something I feel very strongly about keeping kosher and about observing the Sabbath and living my life according to the Torah.
People who go through this expense and trouble to keep that lifestyle would definitely be offended by those who consider themselves as Jewish but don't go through the trouble, don't go through the expense, and don't show any interest of that being an important issue for them to go through life.
Schapiro disagrees.
I'm Jewish. I don't deny it in any way, and just because I eat bacon doesn't make me, any less of a Jew in my eyes.
With that in mind, he says he will continue to eat high off the hog. For independent sources, Abi Ishola.
That's our show. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next week.
Until then, be independent-minded.